Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Mr. President, dignitaries on the dais, members of AMP, ladies and gentlemen. As it is a tough task to speak on the last session of any conference, post-lunch, add to that you're speaking after an illustrious and eminent speaker like Professor Kundu. Anyway, I should do my best to keep you awake. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. It's an honor for me to be here today amidst this august audience, and thank you AMP for inviting me, and also congratulations on your 10th anniversary. I think from what I've seen or heard in the last couple of hours that I've been here, and also what I've read, you guys are doing an exemplary job, and I'm sure you'll continue to do that as more and more people join and become your partners, which I think is very important for any success. I see from the program that you had some very eminent speakers over the last 2 days. I do not enjoy the benefit of listening to those deliberations. Therefore, if I sound any repetitive, please do pardon me. And more so if I'm sounding contradictory to what they've said already, more so. I also do not have the complete advantage of knowing the composition of this audience. So again, please maaf karna if I sound too naive here. Just to correct my introduction, I have been advising foreign governments and businesses and brands for the last 3 decades. I stepped down as the Australian government's Senior Trade Commissioner to India and South Asia after nearly 2 decades. In the last 4 years, I've set up a company that advises and represents foreign governments, such as Oman. I'm their official representative in India and Australia. I advise the government of Bosnia and a number of brands like Australian Pink Diamonds, Australian Drag Racing, and a few other brands. I'm an Australian citizen. I grew up in India, but my family lives in Australia. With a quick introduction, the topic I've been asked to speak on today is, this has been given to me, global developments in world trade and its impact on India, especially its unorganized business sector. I can understand where it's coming from because Muslims, large percentage of Muslims work in the unorganized sector. With your permission, I would like to break my speech into 2 broad categories. Initially talk briefly about my subject of expertise, which is world trade, and some recent interesting phenomena or trends that are likely to impact on each of our lives and jobs. Then talk about the unorganized sector in India, where most Muslims are employed, as I say. I've also been asked to bring it in context with the economic development of Muslims. I'm not an expert, it's not my domain, but I think as someone who advises governments and businesses, I'll use the same yardstick to see as an outsider what I can perceive as some of the challenges and also perhaps some solutions. All right, let's get started then. Trade between people across nations and continents has happened for centuries, as we know. People have identified regions with unique products and services and traded them in regions where there's a demand for that. The Silk Road, the Spice Road are good examples where traders travel thousands of kilometers over months and years to trade. Our Prophet, peace be upon him, was a trader too. Trade is good for any country, any economy. When people connect to trade, they do just more than that. They imbibe each other's cultures, practices, languages, religions, and best practices. This is how civilizations have evolved, and they'll continue to evolve. So trade is just an opportunity as a tool for people to come together, communities to come together. So let's not underestimate the importance of trade or business or investment in any socio-economic context. In the last decades, trade expansion has been much faster than ever before. Today, the sum of exports and imports across all nations is higher than 50% of global production. Just to give you an idea, 50% of global production, more than 50% of global production is traded, imported or exported amongst countries. At the turn of the 19th century, this figure of 50% was just below 10%. Investment is another phase of trade where you secure trade on a long-term sustainable basis by proactively creating opportunities rather than waiting for them to happen. Creating not just for today or tomorrow, but on a much, much longer term, strategically. The One Belt, One Road initiative by the Chinese is probably the best example, where they're trying to bring together, I think, 68 countries over nearly $1 trillion to secure their exports. Let's look at some broad trends in international trade. Trend number one. Well, the past few decades saw the world breaking down trade barriers, bringing down tariffs, signing free trade agreements, forming economic blocs such as the European Union or the NAFTA or the GCC or the ASEAN, to benefit from the cheaper raw materials, cheaper labor, to make more efficient products and services. Each country bloc had to identify its core strength. You could not be good at everything. Obviously, you had to find your own core strength. And based on those core strengths, identify what are you going to be good at. For example, China identified it's going to be a factory for the world based on the cheap manufacturing techniques and skills. India, because of the literate, skilled labor, turned out to be a huge supplier of the workforce for the world, such as in BPOs and the ITs and stuff, so on and so forth. Countries gained access to cheaper goods and services, and consumers benefited. The scales of manufacturing went up to global levels as the whole world shrank into a global village. But if you look at the last few years, you're not only seeing the trend slow down, but also reverse in many instances. The America First policy of Trump, on the wave of which he got elected, is definitely not in line with this. The Brexit, which again was, many people think, ill-conceived, only time will tell that, is another example of that. This is happening because our perceptions that globalization is only, or has only helped the rich and the powerful multinational companies who use their might and power to manipulate governments, manipulate systems, markets for their benefits, whereas the large unorganized sectors or the locals or the SMEs really did not reap the benefits to that extent. There are arguments that the rich got richer and the poor, the disparity with the poor only increased. There are cases, I can talk about Australia, where an entire industry got wiped out. For example, Australia had a very thriving manufacturing sector. We had 4 car manufacturing companies until 4, 5, 6 years ago, and today there are none. The reason? The cost of labor in Australia is about $60 per man hour. Across the borders in Thailand, it's $10 per man hour. And why would anyone manufacture a car in Australia when they can do it at 1/6 the cost of labor? So the whole industry just vanished. So the jobs have shifted out of many countries, and of course jobs have also been created in many countries. In addition to this, increasingly there are fears of migrants taking over this, what are becoming more and more scarce jobs. Probably the pendulum of free trade swung a bit too far, and some people think it's time for it to get a course correction. These fears and discontent have created an opportunity for nationalists and right-wing parties across the world, and we are seeing it across Europe, US, and many other parts of the world. They are playing on these fears, they're playing on these concerns to say that jobs are for locals, it's America first, or whatever slogans may be, and to protect jobs from immigrants, to create jobs for locals, and that's the new sentiment. Trend 2. There was a time when I joined the Australian government service in '95. I think even then, trade policies followed foreign policies of any country. Today, thanks to globalization, foreign policies follow trade policies. Countries go where there is an economic opportunity for them. After Mr. Trump's attempts to disregard some very long and well-established relationships such as NAFTA or even WTO, and say I'm only going to focus on what makes sense for America, not the rest of the world, there seems to be some kind of a vacuum in global leadership. Because earlier America used to be the moderator and say I'm going to play a role in bringing countries together, but now with America trying to withdraw and say I'm going to focus only on America, there is some kind of a vacuum. And the old allies such as Australia or the European Union all feeling a little confused. China sees it as a perfect opportunity to expand its presence, not just economic but also military and geographic presence. And and also considering the fact that globalization is, anti-globalization is extremely detrimental to countries like China, which only thrive on its exports. If every country says we're going to manufacture, make in India and not Chinese, or America first, Chinese are going to really be the most suffered nation. So they are trying to utilize this opportunity to get into the world arena and build, for example, again, like I said earlier, OBOR, get about 60, 68 countries, invest about $1 trillion, and play a dominant role, and perhaps revive the old spice Silk Road. Third trend, many rich and developed countries are in the grips of a big demographic shift towards older population. For example, I read somewhere that Japan sold more adult diapers than baby diapers last year or so. So there is a big problem of old people who are obviously not contributing to the productivity, but at the same time you want jobs for the locals. On the other hand, countries like India, which have about 52% of the 1.3 billion people are less than 25 years age, so they are perfectly position to take up those jobs. So it will be very interesting to see how, on one hand, the nationalization, on the other hand, the need to have labor force from other countries is going to go hand in hand. Trend 4, I think it was mentioned earlier, we have already entered the era of Internet of Things and artificial intelligence. I won't dwell much on this, but suffice to say that the way businesses are run, the way products are produced is all going to change. Most of the jobs as we see today, the designations as we see today, will not exist for sure in the next few decades. So this is going to have serious problems of the jobs and therefore of the societies and various other sort of aspects linked to the societies. Let me now go into the unorganized sector. The unorganized or the informal sector employs nearly 90%, or perhaps more than 90% of India's labor force. Right? They usually are casual laborers in agriculture, transport, construction, you name it, the street vendors, the maid servants, all of them. Given most of them do not have formal qualifications, their skills are unrecognized, leading to low level of pay and working conditions. Banks, as it was mentioned earlier, do not consider them worthy of giving loans because they're high-risk category. They also do not have access to government programs and schemes and other things, which means middle people come into play, and they fleece them, and the loans they borrow are much, much higher rates, which will always ensure that they are caught in the vicious circle of poverty. I think that's a very important aspect that we must recognize. If India has to grow at a healthy rate, it's very important that the socio-economic conditions of this massive workforce has to improve. Now, Muslims are the second largest majority of India, right? There are nearly 200 million Muslims in India, and it's a no-brainer that if India has to achieve a higher rate of growth, India has to reach, to be counted amongst the most developed and the rich nations, this large segment of its population also has to contribute to its growth. And as we saw from Professor Kundu's presentations, it is not. It is competing to be amongst the lowest with the SCs and the STs, which wasn't the case. And what is even more worrying is that the trend seems to be continuing and in most cases worsening. The figures can be varying from report to report, but the bottom line is they're very worrying, very, very worrying for people. Muslims have the highest ratio of jobless graduates, the highest rate of poverty. And if you consider Muslim females, I think it's even more worrying. What affects the informal sector obviously affects all the Muslims who are largely employed in the informal sector. The grave reality, as we heard, is the second largest majority of India is one of the most relegated, neglected and backward communities of the nation on almost all indicators of well-being, economical and education. I think this is something that we as young professionals, young Muslims, young entrepreneurs of today need to really worry about. It's not something we should be really proud of. And that's why I'm really glad that you guys have joined together today and provide a platform for people of various thinking, various thought processes to come together and suggest ways of improving the economic conditions of Muslims. I don't know how many of you have heard of the Mahmoodur Rahman Committee findings. I just happened to see on the internet side. Professor Kundu would obviously know better. As per the findings, which has never been revealed or never been tabled, 45% of Muslim households have a per capita income of less than 500 rupees per month in Maharashtra. 58% of Muslims in urban Maharashtra live in slums. The World Bank definition of extreme poverty, I'm not saying poverty, extreme poverty, is defined as living on less than US dollar 1.9 per day on PPP basis. If that's $1.9 is considered extreme poverty, what would you call people living on 25 cents a day, which is 500 rupees per month? I think this is something we all need to absorb. Let us now go to the last segment of my speech. As I said, it's not my forte, but as someone who advises governments, businesses, brands on strategies, I think as someone who never lets his heart rule over the head, to be frank, I think it's very, very simple to find out what is ailing the community. One is, there are a number of factors, but I would like to just highlight two, which in my personal view are the most important things that need to be done immediately as on today's basis. Again, it's been covered. One is focus on formal education and skills. And second, empowerment of women. It's easier said than done, right? It's simple. But I think to be able to achieve this, what is to me the most challenging thing is change of mindset of the community itself. It's high time our leaders and preachers recognize the importance of living a happy life, dignified life, and poverty-free life on this earth as much as the life thereafter. I think most of the sermons we hear is all about the life thereafter, but I think the Creator would also like to see you lead a good, dignified, happy, poverty-free life on this planet. And thank you. And it is not necessary that you have to go through dozakh to reach Jannat. You can live a nice life, dignified life here, still reach Jannat, right? I think that should be our focus of all of us. There's no conflict between deen and dunya at any point of time. Deen apni jagah pe hai, dunya apni jagah pe hai. And I think we should be very, very clear on that part. And the bottom line is economic development is the key to success of Muslims. I think that's very, very important based on all these factors we have seen. Scientific studies have also proved, if you take countries like Australia or Singapore, where you have a composite communities living together. You know, Australia is home to about 140 different nationalities and different ethnic communities and stuff. They tend to prosper much more than people trying to live in ghettos. So I think another issue which was also touched upon earlier is people trying to live in ghettos, because what happens is status quo is very difficult to challenge, to change, right? It resists any change to the community. So I think that's another aspect we need to clearly look at. I think organizations such as AMP should also focus on getting children to schools and setting up vocational educational and training centers to impart formal skills to youth as well as the old. Schemes that allow people to earn while they learn and learn while they earn. In fact, right now I'm advising the Oman government on a program called Omanization, which is providing jobs to local people. And the challenge is you can't provide jobs to people unless they are employable, right? So how do you make them employable? Give them the necessary skills. Not everybody can be or wants to be a doctor or an engineer or a lawyer. People can be good certified electricians, mechanics. They can always build up on those courses. And we have some fantastic programs in Australia. And we had the Omani government delegation in Australia 2 months ago. They were in India last week. So I'm advising them. I'm happy to share those experiences with you. Coming to the next point, women are half of the community in any country or any community, right? No community can prosper if 50% of your population is not educated or not, and is impoverished, if it's not empowered. In India, 97% of women are in unorganized sector compared to 93, 94 for men. Almost all the women are in unorganized sector except 2 or 3%. And this, I'm assuming, holds good for Muslim community as well. In my personal view, having an educated woman is as much or perhaps even more important than having an educated male in a family. Because if a family has an educated woman, she'll ensure her children are also educated, she'll ensure her family is managed better, finances are managed better, and they don't get into poverty so easily. A literate woman can also better manage the family, as I said. There are a number of schemes by the government, again it was highlighted earlier, and because of this illiteracy, because of lack of access to these programs and funds, people do not have any knowledge. Again, I think AMP can play an excellent role. I'm sure it's already playing one in connecting those schemes to the people who need them, because a lot of schemes that just go underutilized by Muslims and SCs and STs. I think that's largely due to lack of access or lack of knowledge. Now, to sum up, I strongly believe in the saying that God helps those who help themselves. No one can and should be blamed for the poor state of any community except themselves. We all should be proud to be Indians, as our forefathers have given their sweat and blood for its freedom. As the second largest community, Muslims should not shy away from taking up their share of contribution to its economic growth and prosperity. And to be able to do that, first of all, I think it has to set its own house in order and then think about adding weight to its contribution. Their best contribution would be to help the community raise to the occasion, because we know what the issues are. It's all a question of implementing some of those solutions. And without taking much time, I would like to thank each of you for having me. And I'm around for another half an hour before I fly back to China. I just came to speak here today. My family is all packed up to go on a vacation, so I had to just delay it by a day. That's why I was reluctant to come today. But I'm glad I did. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you very much.